Hi, Poppy Yeager here with This Day in History. March 10th, 1959. Tibetans revolt against their Chinese occupiers. It was about a decade earlier that China first invaded Tibet. China had been engaged in a civil war. And when the communists won and took over the continent, they weren't satisfied. They wanted more. So the People's Liberation Army marched into Tibet, invaded, and took over. The Tibetans were peaceful, so they really weren't prepared for war, and they weren't able to hold off very long. So within a year, they ended up having to sign a treaty. But the treaty promised that the Dalai Lama would have control over domestic affairs. However, in 1959, there was suspicions that the communists were trying to kidnap the Dalai Lama and bring him back to Beijing. He had been invited to the People's Liberation Army headquarters, but he was told to come alone. The Tibetans didn't trust this, so they surrounded his summer palace to prevent him from accepting this invitation. 300,000 Tibetans rallied to surround the palace. Of course, the Chinese weren't happy about this, but they were able to smuggle the Dalai Lama out of Tibet. The Tibetans were able to smuggle him out of Tibet and into India. Once he was gone, the Tibetans, though, however, didn't necessarily move right away. So the Chinese did ultimately open fire on them, killing thousands of Tibetans. After this, the Chinese just ramped up their oppression of the Tibetans, keeping a stranglehold on the Tibetans. Years ago, I had traveled in India, and while I was there, I went to the town that the Dalai Lama lived in. And I'd wanted to meet with the Dalai Lama, but it was just a long process, and I just didn't have the time to go through the channels. But it was really sad to see Tibetan people living in exile from their own country. And then I guess it was a few years after I'd gone to India, I was curious, and I wanted to go to Tibet. I would have loved to have been able to go when they were free and independent, but that's just probably not going to happen in my lifetime. So when I was in China, I got the permit and the special permission from the government in order to be able to go to Tibet. And it was really, really sad. The Tibetan people are very poor, and the language, everything is written in Chinese, and then everything is written in English. And it's only the Tibetan language. It's like small print. It's like they've totally just been pushed to the side. But the palaces, the temples were really pretty. The landscape was gorgeous, but it was still so depressing to see. Anyway, that's This Day in History, March 10th, 1959. Tibetans rebelled against the Chinese.